Hi, folks. Welcome to what day of the week's this? Wednesday. Wednesday's edition of the iWrite Radio videocast stroke podcast. I think it would be very hard for us to ignore Donald Trump, the so-called leader of the free world today. So I think we'll start with him and see where that takes us. Jimmy, you're a great fan of Donald Trump, are you not?
No. In a word, Norrie, no. But he's been particularly ludicrous over the last few days, deciding that the World Health Organization is in some way in league with the Chinese government to spread coronavirus around the world and cutting off their funding. Well, it's actually no surprising that he's cutting off funding, because he does seem to love to cut off funding to anybody that disagrees with him. So I ain't surprised at that, although I'm surprised there's not been a bigger backlash in America. There are a lot of people in the States who are very proud to have the United Nations based in New York and extremely proud to work with worldwide organisations like the WHO, and they've all been quite silent upon this one so far.
My understanding of this is it's a bit like what he did with, where was it in Eastern Europe? The Biden thing.
Ukraine, aye.
The Ukraine, he tried to cut off funding there. But this is actually funding that comes out of their Congress. So he can suspend it for 45 days, apparently, but no longer. And one of the reasons he got impeached was he suspended the Ukrainian money for more than 45 days.
Right.
So it's a technical thing, although apparently there are some of the funds that he does control that he can put a stop to.
Mm-hmm.
But
he's a very, very strange man, Norrie. I saw something earlier on where I remember we were asking last week what happened to helicopter money, and those checks were to start going out this week, $1,200 to round about 70 million Americans. They reckon they're going to be able to process 5 million checks a week. But Donald's had it held up for a couple of days because arbitrarily he's decided that he wants his name on each check. Now, that's never happened before when the people have got government assistance, because that assistance comes from the government and they always want it to appear bipartisan. But apparently Donald is insisting that his name goes on the check so that people think Donald's helping them, not their government.
You can see the flashing light, you know, this, I'm buying votes with this, I'm buying votes with this. It's unbelievable. Stuart?
Well, the first thing I want to say is it's par for the course for Donald Trump, and do you really believe anything he said anyway? Apparently, 2 days ago, he was saying that he was going to lift the lockdown, and he had all the power. He stood there in front of the world, and said he has all the power, he can do what he likes. Turns out he can't. So he's had to roll back.
He's actually made a statement. He's actually made a statement saying that he was going to leave it up to the governors of the states.
Probably because somebody explained to him that that's how the Constitution works, and that he can't arbitrarily just change it because he wants to. He can't have his daughter write a new one in 5 minutes.
Yeah, but that's my whole point right from the start. He stands up and says these things, and 24 hours later he rows back. This whole World Health money, it's another headline grabber that's gone everywhere. I managed to catch the European director of the World Health Organization this morning, and I wish I'd recorded it. He actually ran through the timeline of the first case of coronavirus identified in China, date by date, right through to where we are now. And there is nothing wrong with what China has said and revealed. Yes, the initial guy the doctor that initially raised the possibility, he was kind of sat on by local officials. But once it got going, China have done absolutely everything. By the way, you know who pays their money on time? China.
But that's the other thing. What did Trump think would happen if the World Health Organization started criticizing China? China wouldn't have let them in, wouldn't have
Yeah, China,
allowed them to go in and investigate it.
exactly. China has
You know,
been encouraged by the WHO behaviour to be far more open about this epidemic than it's ever been before. I think we should be praising, or certainly should be looking at the Chinese government and praising the people that have worked with them, because, as I say, they've been far more open. And they've also been far more willing to send aid and information all around the world. And 10 years ago, mate, the Chinese wouldn't have told us about this. It would have just happened.
And that's another issue altogether. It's another story. There is, of course, a story that suggests that Russia's at it as well. It's called soft power. You know, you send all your aid to Africa. Mind you, Africa's going to need a lot of aid on this crisis.
Yeah.
but China are already in Africa. They're building a highway from the Mediterranean right down to South Africa. They've been there for years.
Well, absolutely. But the point is, the accusation is, because there are some people seem to think it's a bad thing. The accusation is that they're investing in Africa, and they're now going to send loads and loads of PPE and doctors to help out. Oh, that's a terrible thing. It's like, what was it said that Nicholas
It's like George Fawkes
with governing too well?
Aye,
Folks,
aye.
Doing it on purpose.
Doing it on purpose.
Stuart, there's also that thing where maybe, just maybe, Trump's ludicrous behaviour actually suits that little extreme right-wing cabal round about him, who really didn't want America to be involved with the UN, really didn't want America to be involved with the world. You know what I mean? These people who, they got their way in the 30s, they got America to take a step back and not be a world leader as such. Maybe this is all designed to push Russia and China into that world leadership role and to spend their money, and the Yanks can just sit back and reap the benefit of that.
Well, what do these people think's going to happen if the police of the world leadership, falls into the hands of China and Russia? Do they think they're going to be able to go into Africa and exploit the diamonds and the oil and the minerals? Where are they going to make their money?
They'll still have the military might. They'll just think they'll be able to cut a deal. America won't be spending so much money, but they'll be able to cut a deal with the Russians and the Chinese. Remember, mate, we were talking about exceptionalism the other day. The Yanks think everybody on the planet wants to do business with them because they're Americans. The reality is people do business with them because of the military might that they've got and the threat that they might just go in and take what they want rather than buying it.
Well, me doing my usual devil's advocate thing, remember that China is every bit as expansionary as America. In the sense that, well, Stuart,
they don't have
China is building ports, airports, and the like all over the world. And part of the deal is that that land that China builds on becomes Chinese sovereign territory. In other words, if they want to move 2,000 troops into that port, airport, whatever, they can do it. China is as imperialistic in its own way as anybody else.
No. Well, it may be the case in recent years. They don't have a history. I mean, they've got a very long history, 1,000 years long history as a nation state. It's shrunk a bit and grown a bit and been a bit battered by the Europeans and then the Americans. The Americans have history right since the Civil War, their Civil War of imperialism, which they deny, but we all can see it. The Chinese don't have that history.
I wonder where the Americans caught that particular habit from.
Well,
the American argument is always that it doesn't look like British imperialism, therefore it isn't imperialism. that is effectively what I mean. If you look at what they've done in Indochina, Indonesia in particular, it's fairly obvious that it's about power.
Yeah, but their brand of ball-baggery isn't as bad as our brand of ball-baggery, so it's all right. It's acceptable.
Well, I'm going to throw in the third pillar in this argument, which is Russia. Great Britain and Russia have been struggling over their empires since the the war in Crimea, which all it showed up to the Russians was they needed to go off and get their army sorted, get a lot more discipline.
Well, the big difference between the European powers and Russia historically was the kind of system that their country was run under. Had Russia been a democracy way back in the 1800s, in the sense that they had a parliament and a different setup rather than a kingdom, it's quite likely that they would have had an even bigger empire.
Well, don't forget.
Than Germany, France, Britain, because remember, and Spain.
Well, they had, don't forget, Russia had colonies in California before it became American.
Well, Russia kind of picked the wrong part of the world, really.
California.
You're almost right, Nori. It's not so much about democracy. They still had serfs up until about 20 years before World War One.
That's what I'm talking about.
Which is even not even remotely like democracy.
No, that's what I'm saying. Had they had, well, shall we call it a more mature political system than the European countries that did establish huge empires? There are Portugal, Spain, Italy in North Africa, Belgium in the Congo, all the European countries had some form of empire, which was simply set up to exploit the natural resources of other parts
of other countries.
But do you know how the history tells us now that how Europe came to dominate the world? Do you know why? Because they were always at war with each other. And they had the most sophisticated military.
Yeah.
Oh, that brings us all back to the US of A, doesn't it?
Just a bit.
When we were talking about this initially, I couldn't help but remember the phrase gunboat diplomacy. I wonder when somebody will start using the phrase drone diplomacy. Because that's effectively what it is. It might have taken weeks to get a gunboat up the Yangtze. It doesn't take that long to get a drone over your head.
Certainly does not. Dreadnoughts look better though, mate. When you seen I don't know, I've never seen one in real life, but when you see the pictures of the dreadnoughts, they were awesome looking. You can understand why people quaked in their boots when one of them sailed up a river.
But if you did sink one,
when I was growing up, the Americans had nuclear submarines on the Clyde, and the Yankee sailors used to. There was a well-known hotel in Hitsocky Hall Street in Glasgow called the Beresford, where all the Turks used to hang out. No,
surely not.
Talking about gunboat diplomacy.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
I got it, Nori.
I think Donald is rather ducked. I can't see how he's going to get himself re-elected unless something incredible happens now, but we'll see.
Jimmy, I couldn't see how he got elected in the first place, and how wrong was I?
I could, mate. Let's be honest. Hillary Clinton only had about 60% of the Democratic Party working for her to win that election. Joe Biden will have 100% of the Democratic Party working for him to win this election, mate.
God, I hope so. Jimmy, Stuart.
They will be having an election, it looks like, because the South Koreans today have managed to have an election in the middle of this virus crisis.
I saw that.
Americans have got no excuse.
What was the result in Georgia?
Oh,
I've got a Scooby, mate.
I think the Democrats won that, and it was all geared up to make it very difficult.
Oh, the American Georgia, not European.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they won it. I must look that up. Sorry to bring that up without an answer, folks.
No worries. We'll get to it.
Okay, Stuart, I believe you have some headlines.
Oh, yeah, 2 or 3 headlines which might raise a few arguments here. So they're not all light-hearted. 11 residents died at a care home from suspected coronavirus in Paisley. And on top of that, a further 13 residents are showing symptoms of COVID-19. I've not even seen that on any other on any of the TV news or anything, which is a bit of a worry. That's a place I know well. Here's another one. Nicola Sturgeon is being urged to suggest to world leaders that they consider a 90% windfall tax on the estimated $30 trillion wealth hidden offshore, that would pay the economic costs of the coronavirus pandemic worldwide. And of course, we're going to need that in Africa. And another one, Plaid Cymru's leader. Yesterday we were talking about this PPE scandal about it being diverted from English companies away from Welsh and Scottish care homes. Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price has written to the EU, urging it to investigate reports that PPE suppliers have been told to prioritise the NHS in England. No idea why he thinks that would be worthwhile.
Yeah.
Who floated the going after the, what did you say, 30 trillion hidden offshore?
He's a new Scot who's pro-independence, and he's based in Dumfries. Beyond that, I don't have that information in front of me.
Well, he's a bigger ass than two bums, and Nicola's never going to get behind that.
Well, I mean, the difficulty is in the actual wording. Hidden offshore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is predicated on the fact you can't find the money. If you find the money, you can't find out whose it is.
I don't think.
And you're not going to get the Americans sending a drone to the Cayman Islands or the Virgin Islands, because that's where the rich hide other do.
Not very true. You're right. I mean, I don't think it was anybody serious.
The care home one, I do worry about, because a lot of the press conference today concentrated on care homes and that. And obviously we got new numbers today showing that a quarter of all deaths have occurred in care homes. So it's a major worry. But I did think that the presser today, some of the questions were bordering on the offensive. I think the media are starting now to hammer at, and they're taking an anti-expert tone, and it's quite noticeable that the likes of James Matthews for Sky News in particular, the disdain in his voice. I mean, I'm sorry, James. Barry, you got a degree in journalism at the local polytechnic or something. The reason you went and done journalism is because you're not as smart as the boy that was top of your class, became a doctor, and is now interim chief medical officer. So that kind of annoyed me. And then we got the worst stuff coming out for the Daily Record and Tom Gordon and what have you.
That was a Herald. What got me was the, shall we say, intentional blinkeredness of the questioners.
Yeah.
The refusal to accept that testing is absolutely no use for anything but telling you you've got the disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's no good. It can't tell you you're going to get it. It can't tell you you've had it.
I know, you're right. I mean, some of the questions were, what about, are you going to be testing people before they're discharged from hospital into care homes? Well, they could well have had the coronavirus, and a test won't prove anything.
All the test does is say that your symptoms,
you don't have it now,
that you're showing are either coronavirus or not. It doesn't, and it's beginning to really annoy me because it's a smoke screen.
Yeah.
It's hiding the questions that should be answered. I mean, how many people have asked the question, how's it looking for our antibody test?
Mm-hmm. The problem with that is, mate, but the reality, I do get a bit annoyed when people even mention antibody tests, because we're no further forward on that than we were in December last year when it first came to light in China. Well, there are antibody tests out there, but they didn't work. They're no in any way accurate. So.
That's Matt Hancock's excuse.
Aye.
When they don't get to their 100,000 tests, he is going to turn around and say, well, I said 100,000 because I was expecting an antibody test to be available.
Mm-hmm. They're not even close, mate. I think they got 14,500 tests yesterday. So his 100,000 tests a day it's just not going to happen. And
the actual fact of the matter is that to turn around and say, right, we've tested 100,000 people, 95,000 of them didn't have coronavirus. That's great. Tell me, Matt, have they got it today?
Exactly.
And
You
that's
tested
the
95,000. Exactly. You tested 100,000 yesterday. How many of them are you testing in a day?
You know, so the only way it's any use is if, as you just hinted, Jimmy, if you test somebody, the whole population every day,
Which is just a physical impossibility.
which, you know, it's madness.
I mean, it's noticeable, mate. I didn't, you know, I'm no fan of the Scottish media anyway, but it's this in particular. I do hope people that aren't particularly interested in politics are watching some of this and noticing that 99% of the media are anti-SNP, and they go into these press conferences with clever wee questions designed to try and trip up the First Minister. They're not asking questions that people want asked. I mean, that lassie for the record was outrageous. She's Victoria Aitken, I think her name was. Aye. And she basically suggested that because care homes had more than one case of COVID-19, they weren't listening to advice. And what was the First Minister going to do? Was she going to go in there and take over the care homes?
That's right.
It's a ridiculous proposition to make.
But that's what they want them to do. They want the Scottish government. It was a good point, actually, made by Jean Freeman, where she said that care homes who buy their own stuff because they're private care homes, they buy their own PPE. But due to the pressure on them at the moment, the Scottish government stock is used to top them up.
I think it's worth saying that today's performance by the three of them, the First Minister, the interim Chief Medical Officer, and the Cabinet Secretary for Health, I thought it was professional.
And it must be pretty soul destroying, Stuart, for them to go in every day and know that 99% of the media are in there trying to make mugs of them. They're not in there asking genuine questions to get genuine information. They're in there trying to make mugs of them.
Looking for a mistake. Stuart, sorry.
No, I just did think it was very impressive. We got information about an aspect of social care that I've not heard of until today, but we are aware of, which is voluntary social care, where for example, a 13-year-old child is looking after their disabled 35-year-old mother, who may be a junkie or may have something socially more acceptable, or even, I think it's private care, personal care, I think it was called, and I think that could be Macmillan.
You can actually employ somebody to care for you in your own home.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of that happens.
And the question was reasonable. It was asked about that, and I thought Jean Freeman seemed to be very much on the front foot on that one. She was saying, well, it's obviously going to be difficult to identify everybody, and she didn't actually say we've got to watch out for people claiming to be caring for somebody and they're not. They're just a junkie down the road. No, I thought they were well ahead of the game today.
Yeah, I noticed as well the NRS figures that came out and talked about deaths out with hospitals. That was quite a big bump. I've done a wee bit of maths, and I'm not very good at that, but it was a 69% bump in deaths when you add in the stuff in the community. Now that's larger than the ONS figures that came out yesterday for England and Wales. They had a 50% bump. I've noticed, again, there's the obfuscation. Why on earth is the Office for National Statistics giving us figures for England and Wales yesterday? They've been giving us figures for England and figures for Wales for weeks. Why have they put that together? And the second thing, they're only ever honest with their figures once the Scottish Government come out with far more broken down figures, far more accurate figures, and then England follows about a week or two later.
Well, I was going to say the figures that the ONS figures announced yesterday was for the week before the NRS figures announced in Scotland. In other words, they're for nearly a week and a half ago.
Yeah, it's a 14-day lag in England and a 7-day lag in Scotland.
Further back, and as you said, a lot of the figures you get from London, they don't make it clear whether it's just England and Wales, or England or the whole of the UK. And
yeah, they do They do like to muddy the waters when they're putting figures out there.
I've got another prediction for you. At the end of all this, there's going to be a huge stushy about how deaths were recorded in England and possibly Wales. when it comes to care homes. That it's going to be massive. Because if they're running at 13% and we're running at 40%, there is something not right. Because the rest of Europe's running at over 40%.
There's a huge disparity between those figures, Norrie, and let's be honest, London historically has been known to put slants on things and spin them very much more than Edinburgh has in the short time that we've had government here.
Mm-hmm.
Can I suggest a slightly different angle? Would you be surprised to discover that Alex Salmond's spokesperson, Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, is suggesting Scotland must go its own way to beat the pandemic?
I would be a wee
Alex Salmond's spokeswoman.
She produces Alex Salmond's TV show every week.
Right. Is this an official position she holds now?
No.
Yes, she was an MP. Sorry.
Yeah, I know who she is, but I'm saying, do we know she's speaking on behalf of Alex Salmond?
Are you going to?
I'd be very surprised if she was.
I was very surprised if she wasn't.
Well, she's a woman in her own right, and as you said yourself, an ex-MP. Can she not just speak her mind?
Well, she might be, but anyway. We can disagree on that. But
okay.
she raises the issue about Scotland should be making its own moves.
I think Tasmania's maybe a wee bit far from the front line and a wee bit far from the information to be suggesting that. I think Scotland is, well, Nicola said yesterday, Scotland is perfectly willing to make its own moves and take its own decisions as and when the science indicates that. And there's also the thing that at the end of the day, politically, it's very, very difficult to do things majorly different from what London does because they hold the purse strings.
Well, that's fair. Ian McWhirter, today's article, mentions there's an MP that I've got a lot of time for, Angus Brendan MacNeil. Is by no means alone in believing that Scotland would be better dealing with our own problems unfettered, like Norway, Ireland, etc. Many MSPs are saying so privately and wondering why Nicola Sturgeon is not distancing herself from the laissez-faire approach to the English Tories. But
that's just McWhirter shit-stirring again, isn't it?
But the key point McWhirter's making is, if you're following the science and to some extent you are, he brings up the point that we've all said, there's not a lot she can do. The money comes from London, etc., etc. But there is a difference between handling the medical problem, the virus as a medical problem, as a health issue, and the politics. And when to this, the politics are, oops, couldn't Scotland be better off on its own, dealing with it differently? And what
yeah, Stuart, but Stuart, but if there's an SNP, MP, or MSP that doesn't hold the view that Scotland would be better doing everything on its own, they shouldn't be in the party and they shouldn't be an elected representative of the party.
Very fair.
So what's McWhirter's answer? What does McWhirter suggest that in this present situation she does differently?
Well, not so sure. He sums up, though, what he says to sum up, which is reasonable. Politically, the savvy thing to have done was to ignore whatever anything was. Oh, don't forget, Jason Leach got caught out of it this week. Is to go for a panic lockdown to show the voters that you're serious. In politics, doing something is always more appealing than not doing something. On the other hand, scientists don't have to answer to Twitter. The political cycle is not on the same trajectory as this disease, and politicians will get no credit for being right in a couple of years' time.
I do worry, taken for that, as I say, that far too many journals are now starting to question the scientists, they're questioning doctors. And as I said before, there's a reason that these guys are journals. They weren't smart enough to be scientists or doctors.
There's only
them for the wrong reason.
The problem for journalists at the moment is there is only one thing to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the two sort of spikes in interest, one, the PPE that might not be getting sent to Scotland, it is the latest. They are desperate for a scandal.
Joking
They
for
all,
something.
they all sit there, and as soon as anybody from the SNP says anything that doesn't accord with Westminster's story, they're not got the shoulder to the grindstone. Blitz spirit. We should all be in this together. Union, union, union.
Denny.
And the minute the SNP do something dramatically different as a government in Scotland, it's going to be pelters. And the message will be buried in the fucking high you have for the union.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Andrew Neil, of course, he tweeted, watched the Jason Leach interview yesterday morning, and which kind of rebutted what Gene Freeman and Nicola Sturgeon had been saying.
Which preempted what Gene Freeman and Nicola Sturgeon said.
Did it? Sorry.
It was out of date by the time they stepped up to the plate.
Okay, it was well out of date, and he was.
Hence the reason Andrew Neil's bloody going on about it, because they like to drive a wedge between Jason Leach and the First Minister and the Health Minister. But what was going on yesterday at 8 a.m. when Jason Leach spoke was very different to what was going on at 3 p.m. when Matt Hancock finally decided to take the call with Gene Freeman.
Well, it was the same with John Beattie, the former rugby player for Scotland, who's got a radio show on Radio Scotland. And he apparently, I didn't hear it, he gave, who was it he gave a hard time? Wasn't Gene Freeman? He said, boom, might have been. Anyway, he gave the Scottish government spokesperson a real hard time on the drive time show, which would be 5 or 6 o'clock yesterday evening. But by 9 o'clock at night, he was apologising in public all over Twitter.
See, that's why I stay off Twitter.
Okay, here's my take on this, right? The English Health Service has told their suppliers with whom they have contracts to supply them, and they will distribute on behalf, right? So basically, they've got contracts with the English NHS. The English NHS has said, our contract, we want you to supply directly to the people we tell you to supply to. And they're only in England. The manufacturers have taken that to mean they don't supply anywhere else but England.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to be honest with you, if this was a government decision, they're an even bigger bunch of idiots than we think they are. The manufacturers and NHS England did not foresee that this could mean Scotland and Wales, apparently they don't supply Northern Ireland, but Scotland and Wales wouldn't be getting supplies.
Yeah, well, they failed in both. They failed on both points. They failed on the medical point, and they failed on the political point.
But this didn't come from the government. This came from NHS England, whose job it is to supply NHS England.
Mm-hmm.
It was a hiccup. It was an unforeseen circumstance. The criticism that Sturgeon and Freeman are getting is trying to sort out a glitch. This shouldn't be happening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these guys have been told there are 3 things they cannot supply. If you look at the website, the updated website, there are 3 things they cannot supply out with England. Now, let's take a guess at what they might be. Masks, gowns, and gloves. The things that are needed. Everything else they produce, they can send to Wales and Scotland. I mean, it's a fuck up. It's a cock up.
Right, Nori, I'm seeing a cartoon that you need to draw. I can see this. I can see all these Scottish journalists over the carcass of looking like vultures around the carcass of some dead old people in a care home, all drooling and dripping blood.
Well, the fault here, according to the Unionist press and Lord Fuchs and Duncan Hall, is that the Scottish government were told there was a problem in supply, so they went and asked about it. Right? That's the fault. The fault here is they tried to solve a problem. What did they expect them to do? Go, oh, well, no, we can't touch this because it might undermine the union. I mean, it's unbelievable. Both of them accusing the Scottish government of doing something wrong because they tried to solve a problem.
Because they got it right.
Well, there was no right in it. Somebody said to them, we can't get supplies to the private healthcare sector because English suppliers aren't giving us any. Well, what would you do? Pick up the phone and ask why not? Oh, no, you can't do that because you're the SNP. If it had been a Tory government in Scotland or a Labour government in Scotland that did exactly what the SNP have done, no problem. Because it was the sensible thing to do.
Right.
Nicola Sturgeon's got a fan, a famous fan. Brian May, the guitarist.
Oh, didn't he go, he's a horse's ring, I know.
And he told Lorraine that he was well impressed by Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, well, basically, if you don't have a union bias or are deaf, blind, and unable to use your vocal cords, you're going to be a fan of Nicola Sturgeon in this particular pandemic.
I didn't think any politician needs praise from a multi-millionaire.
That's true. I wonder if he could chip in and give the World Health Organization the 500 million. It's a drop in the ocean. 500 million in this emergency is nothing.
Mm.
And Donald Trump's going to pull it. Jesus. Right, Stuart, you've got something to finish on to cheer us all up.
Let's cheer us all up. Apparently, there's a TV show going to be on, I think it's BBC Scotland tonight. And it shows in it, there's a clip of Pope Francis holding a bottle of Scotch whiskey and saying, "This is the real holy water." And it won't be, you won't see this clip in tonight's show because it was censored by the Vatican. But it did happen. The clip showed the Pope accepting a bottle of Oban malt from some Scottish student priests at an event in Rome last year.
Jimmy, well, as a great lover of the Pope, as a
fabulous lover of all organised religion, mate. But good for him. Pope Francis is an interesting character. He's had a hell of a life, and if he's a fan of the Scotch whiskey, more power to his LB. Good on him.
It's the real holy water.
Is he the Pope that failed to stand against Pinochet?
Oh, I don't think so.
No, because he
Argentina.
It was in Argentina, mate. That's an interesting. He worked with the regime at the time, although his take on it is that he was trying to save lives because that particular Argentinian regime were utterly nasty. Well, I think 30,000 people disappeared in the space of a year. What happened to them?
I seem to remember seeing something where some of his fellow priests were jailed because of their stance in favor of the people.
Well, that was an era of kind of socialist priests. I forget what were they called all over South America. Loads of priests were becoming very left wing.
I think, did they not fail during a Second World War incident?
I believe there was a bit of a scandal around certain priests who got killed, and people thought that he'd betrayed them. But the reality was very different. It just took some considerable time for that reality to come out.
And on that cheery note, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you, Jimmy Hutton, Stuart Lockhead. I'm Norrie Stewart. Thanks for listening, folks. And we'll hopefully catch up with you tomorrow.
Aye, right.
Cheers for now.